Hi everyone, my name is Joe Mahoney. This is a presentation on how to make an audiobook. It's based on a presentation I gave to the Creative Academy for Writers the other day. I thought it might be a good idea to make another version for anyone else out there who might be interested in turning their book into an audiobook. I'm going to cover basically everything that you see on this slide, just an overview of the process, the equipment that is required, the environment that you want to record in, bit about the preparation, performance, post-production, double-checking all your work, the specs that are required, and a tiny bit about distribution. Who am I? Why am I qualified to present this information? Well, I worked for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation as an audio technician for many years. A decade of those years, I was a recording engineer in the radio drama department, where we made lots of radio plays, recording actors and music, and also recorded several novels and short stories. I'm still with the CBC and the management team. After that, I converted my own novel into an audiobook. It's called A Time and a Place, originally published by Five Rivers Publishing. It's up on Audible and Find a Way of Voices right now. After I recorded my novel as an audiobook, Amazing Stories magazine hired me to record several of their short stories in their first couple of magazines. And I also did for them an omnibus edition of Captain Future by Alan Steele. My goal in this presentation is to give you a practical overview of how to make an audiobook based on my experience. I'll talk about the equipment you need, the preparation required, how to record an audiobook, a bit about editing and mastering your audiobook, and a bit about what distributors like Audible and Find a Way Voices are looking for in terms of quality control. The obligatory quote from a master storyteller, Stephen King, who said they don't call it storytelling for nothing, suggesting that the audiobook version of your book is absolutely an appropriate way to tell your story. Why make an audiobook? Well, audiobooks were a $2.67 billion US industry in 2019. Everybody expects that to just continue to grow. So as you go about making your audiobook, the main tools of your trade are going to be a computer of some kind, a microphone, and headphones. You may require a small mixer, depending on what kind of mic you choose. You will also want a mic stand, whether it's a table stand or a bigger floor stand, and you'll need cables to go in between your various pieces of equipment, again, depending on what type of mic you use. And you may want a music stand to put your script on as you're reading your audiobook, depending on how you do it. So what kind of microphone do you need? You have a few options. You can use a USB microphone that plugs directly into your computer, which is very simple. Doesn't need any peripheral gear other than a cable. Or you can use a type of mic that will require a mixer and XLR cables. You probably don't need to spend more than $200 for a microphone. Really, it's more important to know how to use a microphone than what kind of mic you use. My choice for recording an audiobook is a Shure SM7B, which is pictured here. It's about $500 Canadian, maybe more than you want to spend, maybe more than you need to spend. Michael Jackson famously used this microphone to record his album Thriller, which probably many of you will agree is a pretty good sounding album. I chose it because with my work with CBC, I was the first engineer on a show called Q, and I had to choose a microphone for the host. We tested a lot of microphones, and this to me was the best sounding microphone with that particular host. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for that application, it's good enough for me. I knew I could count on it. It has a very natural sound. It eliminates noise from the rest of the house. It is a dynamic microphone as opposed to a condenser microphone, and a condenser microphone requires fan and power. This one does not. However, I discovered that this mic does require a bit of a boost I had to throw a cloud lifter, also pictured there, into the sound chain, but that's very simple to use. You just plug the microphone into the cloud lifter with an XLR cable, the cloud lifter into the mixer, and the mixer into the computer, and it provides an additional 20 dB gain, which just gives you a little bit of extra gain to play with. And for me, it was worth it because I just really love this microphone. You have to be careful with it that it might pop a little bit. It does have a windsock built into it, as you can see, but you might want to use a pop filter in between you and the microphone, or whatever microphone you happen to be using. But a simpler option might be simply a USB microphone, such as the Blue Yeti pictured here, which is a perfectly fine microphone. And the way this works is you simply plug the microphone directly into the computer. There's no fuss, no bother, no extra cables, and it's a lot of bang for your buck. You know, it sounds perfectly acceptable. You should be able to get it for about 180 bucks Canadian. Another important piece of gear is the headphones that you wear. You're going to want them to be comfortable because you're going to be wearing them for a long time. You want them to be sound insulating so they don't bleed sound into the microphone. You don't want that. I recommend that you try them before you buy them because you want them to be happy with the sound of them. And don't be fooled by really expensive headphones out there that you put them on and you go, wow, this bass is incredible. They may not actually be replicating the sound very well. They may just be reproducing the bass higher to kind of create the illusion that they're good sounding headphones, but they might not necessarily be. Bring your favorite music along and listen to your music in the headphones and make sure that they sound okay to you. Even though for this application, obviously, you're just going to be using them for voice. If you choose not to go with the USB microphone and you go with a microphone like the one that I'm using, into which I'm speaking right now, so you can kind of hear what it sounds like, you'll need a mixer interface. I use a Steinberg UR22 mixer. It's about $200 to $250 Canadian with stereo XLR inputs and a USB connection into the laptop. It also has a MIDI interface if you're recording music. So it's good for more than audiobook applications if you're looking to expand your home production. I've had no issues with it whatsoever. Very happy with it. And obviously you need some kind of a computer. I use a MacBook Pro, which is perfectly fine. Use it for many applications. Whatever computer you use, you're just going to need to make sure that it has sufficient memory, that you can run your audio recording software on it, so it's sufficiently powerful to be able to do that. It should also be quiet. You do not want a laptop or a computer with a loud fan that's going to bleed into your recording. And you just need to be able to, if you're using a mixer, to be able to plug the mixer into the computer and/or a USB microphone. Recording software, there's lots of great recording software out there. I've used most of them. I've used Pro Tools. I've used an early version called Descartes. I've used Cubase. I've used Adobe Audition. But the one that I am perfectly happy to use for audiobook application is Audacity, which I love because it's simple, it's straightforward. The learning curve is not high. It's and best of all, it's free. So you can download it directly off the net. And like I said, it doesn't take that long to learn and does everything you need it to do to make your audiobooks and other recordings. The whole setup doesn't have to be fancy. This is my setup here. You'll notice that I don't have egg cartons on the walls. I don't have any sound insulation anywhere. I just have the laptop. You can see there's my Sennheiser headphones, my Steinberg mixer off to the right, sitting on a copy of Jane Austen's collected works just for added pretentiousness. I have a pop filter in front of the microphone, but I still popped my P's, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And I was able to get away with no sound insulation because of the microphone and because of the preparation I did beforehand in the house. I made the house very quiet, and this is a mic that you have to work very closely anyway, so it doesn't pick up a lot of extraneous sound. And I was able to get a perfectly quiet and fine recording in this environment. It's very important that you don't record, just to state the obvious, in a bathroom, in a kitchen, in a jail cell, or a locker room, or any other live environment where your voice is going to reflect off those very reflective surfaces. So all told, the recording environment needs to be quiet. You need to run around your house basically and turn off any dishwashers, dryers, air conditioning, heating, and make sure that your neighbor isn't draining their pool, and that their dog isn't outside barking, and that planes aren't flying by. However, if there is some noise reduction is your friend, and we'll talk a bit about that later. So when you're getting ready to actually read your book, to turn it into an audiobook and record the whole thing, there's a few things that you're going to want to do ahead of time. You want to prepare your script. You want to prepare it by reading through it. Now, you can read directly from your book if you want. You can just hold it up and turn the pages. Make sure you don't record the sound of turning the pages. You can print your book out as a script, have it on that music stand I mentioned earlier. Or you can have it up on a PDF on your computer, which is what I did. And I would just toggle back and forth between the recording software and the PDF version of the script, which worked perfectly fine for me. If you can, which you should be able to, make your font large. You know, don't be working off an 8-point font. Make it a 20-point font, whatever you need to be able to make sure that you can see it clearly and easily, whether you're looking off your laptop or whether you're printing it out. And this is a good suggestion if you're out doing a reading in public as well. When you print out the version of the section of the book that you're going to read, print it out extra large just to make it easier to not get lost, easier to see what you're reading. That's good to do for the audiobook as well. So read through the script or the section that you're going to be reading ahead of time. Check for pronunciation. Maybe you wrote words that you don't actually know how to pronounce. Look them up ahead of time. Mark it up if you need to. If you have character voices you want to do, which many readers like, to bring the whole thing to life, figure out what those character voices are going to be so that you can perform them consistently. Rehearse the thing, read it out loud, but you can also record the rehearsal, which you can easily discard later, or you may discover that you want to use portions of that rehearsal. And just another reminder to turn off your HVAC, your air conditioning or heating, or anything else, or fans in the bathroom or what have you. If your family's around, encourage them to go someplace else. Or if they insist on remaining, they're going to need to be quiet and not walking around. For instance, I'm recording in the basement, and if my family's upstairs, I can pick up the sound of their walking footsteps. So I need them to not walk around. For the performance itself, you're going to want to make sure that you're perfectly comfortable. You can do the performance either by standing. Some people think that loosens up the diaphragm. Or you can sit, which I typically do, and which I'm obviously doing now. As you're recording, watch out for extraneous noises. Make sure if your dog or a cat is in the house, that they're not close by or not bumping into anything. Probably by far the most noises that you will inflict upon your recording will be mouth noises. So just try not to do that. Don't eat beforehand. Don't eat chips before or during your recording. You may find that you get choked up, or it just creates a little bit of extra mouth noise. Try, if you can, to make as few mistakes as possible. This was my problem when I first started. I couldn't get through a sentence without making a mistake. And this made for an awful lot of editing in post-production, but I got much better as I went along. If you do make mistakes, don't sweat it. Just stop and start again at the beginning of that sentence or a few sentences earlier. Don't start in the middle of the sentence. That will make editing difficult. Slow down. Go much slower than you think you need to. This was another mistake that I made with my recording initially. I recorded at a speed that I felt was comfortable, and then when I went to edit it later, it was way too fast. Listening to it, my brain could barely parse what it was that I was reading, so I needed to insert spaces to slow it down and or actually re-record whole sections of the performance. As I mentioned, talking about preparation, have fun with the voices, with your characters. If you can do voices, great. Helps bring it to life. Be consistent. And as you're recording, record it one section at a time. Don't jump from section to section, because piecing it together later can be a nightmare. For example, I decided to record certain characters all at the same time so that I would have consistency of how they sounded with their accents. This helped with the consistency of the characters, but it really complicated the editing as I had to edit all those sections and then go find where they belonged and insert them in. If I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't do it that way. I would just try to get the voice right in the place where it's supposed to be. So once you get your recording done, then you need to do your post-production, which involves editing it and cleaning it up and doing any kind of processing that you might need to do. So the way I did it was I would record a section, typically a chapter, which would be anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes long. And then I would edit all the mistakes out of it and try to clean it up. And once I got it edited, I would go back and I would do another pass. And this time I'm looking for anything that I missed, like mouth noises, pops, weird clicks, or anything like that. And I would edit those out. A little tip here too: when you're editing, if you're editing a pickup, what we call a mistake, keep the original breath. Just a little tip to make the editing easier. On your original take where you made the mistake, you might have a breath like, "And John walked into the room." That's the breath you want to keep. Then if you make a mistake on that and you redo it and you have a new breath, get rid of the new breath and keep the old breath. Just trust me, it'll make it easier. After I got as many of those weird noises or mouth noises or clicks or anything out of the way and had it all edited together, then I would look at it for some of the requirements that you need to make it acceptable to Audible and ACX and Find Away Voices, etc., and just make it a good, acceptable recording. So one of the things that I would do is apply noise reduction, because you want to have as low a noise floor as possible. So if you do have any air conditioning or heating or airplanes in the background or lawnmowers or whatnot, this can really help get rid of all that. And the best way to do that is just whatever software that you're using, whether it's Audacity or otherwise, it will have noise reduction, and just experiment with it. It's pretty straightforward. Typically, you just select a section that's supposed to be silent, and then choose your parameters, how much you want the noise to be reduced, and then you apply it to the entire section of recording that you're dealing with. And you might be quite surprised and pleased at the results. I would also use a limiter to ensure that it didn't peak higher than minus 3 dB. Basically, when you're recording, you're going to have a meter typically on your software, and you don't want it to go into the red. You want it just a little bit below, because you don't want your recording to be too loud or it could distort, and you don't want it to be too low. You want it to be within a certain range. So you're going to be using limiting and gain reduction to try to achieve that. And you don't want a wide dynamic range either. You don't want parts to be really quiet, a whole bunch of parts that are really quiet, and then other parts that are really loud, because you don't want your listeners to have to turn up and down the volume, especially if they're listening in a somewhat noisy environment. Say they're listening in their car where there's a lot of background noise. You want a nice, good, consistent, strong recording. This isn't classical music that we're recording, where you do want a wide dynamic range. This is more like pop music, where you want it to be nice and high all the time and compete with everything else that they might be listening to if they switch over to a top 40 radio station. So another really useful tool is the equalizer. So I actually set this up ahead of time to deal with popped Ps. You might, in the software that you're using and in the equalizer that you're using, there might be a preset which will be called something like a bass cut. And you can use this to just, if you have a popped P, to save you having to re-record it, just select that P, apply the bass cut, and it will get rid of the pop sound, basically. And it will work like 95% of the time. I created my own, I tweaked it, I just made it more pronounced. You can see that I brought it way down there. And I was able to get rid of popped P's and even popped B's quite easily with this. So, and then the other other piece of software or plugin that might help is amplifier, normalizer, gain adjustment. If something is too quiet and you want to get it up to on the same level as everything else. So the best way to look at these tools in your software is to not be afraid of them and be what we call a super user. Just play with them until you understand how they work. And it just requires playing with them and experimenting and seeing what works for you. Don't be afraid of the technology, because it will help you enormously. After you get everything recorded and edited and apply whatever processing you want to it, then you're going to want to check it, because you don't want this going out with missed edits or any weird noises or anything, for two reasons. Number one, it may be rejected by Audible or ACX or Findaway or other distributors. And also, you don't want to embarrass yourself. So you want to listen to your final product. Just make sure that it is acceptable. If you do happen to stumble across a mistake, you can re-record it right there yourself on the fly. That's the beauty of doing this ourselves. We don't have actors that we're relying on. We don't have technicians that we're relying on. So you're listening along and you hear that you have mispronounced a word and you think, oh goodness, that's not acceptable. Well, just re-record that sentence or a few sentences right then and there, and then simply edit it into your recording to replace what you didn't like. The challenge with that is that you're going to want it to match with what came before and what comes after. It takes a little bit of, it's a little fussy, but typically it's just adjusting the volume to get it to match. I mean, when you do the performance, try to perform it the same way as the rest, the same energy level. But then when you've got it in there, you may discover that it's too loud or it's too low. So then just use the tools at your disposal, the plugins, to either increase the gain or lower the gain until it's the same level. And then go back a paragraph or two and listen to it and make sure that it matches. And trust me, it is doable. You can make that happen. So as you're putting this all together, you must adhere to certain specifications, or distributors like ACX will not accept your files. And this can cause considerable delays getting your audiobook published. So we'll just go through them here. Each section or chapter must be no longer than 120 minutes. Probably this is not going to be a problem. In my book, my chapters were typically between 10 minutes and 30 minutes long, so that was not an issue. They request room tone at the beginning and end. I would typically have about a second and a half of room tone at the beginning, and then I would just leave 3 or 4 seconds at the end. And when they say room tone, they really just mean silence, because you're looking to make your noise floor as quiet as possible anyway. Next point is it must measure between minus 23 dB and minus 18 dB. That just means keeping the audio between a specific volume range. So as I mentioned earlier, listeners aren't constantly turning the volume up and down. It must not peak at more than minus 3 dB, and that's to make sure that it doesn't distort and to keep it within a certain range. And there must be a maximum minus 60 dB noise floor. And as I mentioned, if you keep your air conditioning, heating, and that sort of thing to a minimum, and use a proper microphone that isn't set to like an omni pattern, meaning that it isn't picking up the entire house, you're probably going to be fine. Needs to be 192 kilobytes per second or higher, and in MP3 form, so you're not going to want to save it in a WAV form or some other format. The files need to be saved as MP3, and they need to be saved at the setting 192 kilobytes per second. And you'll see when you go to export your files, you will see these settings in the software that you're using. So you just need to make sure that you select the correct settings. And it needs to be one of those settings, it needs to be a constant bit rate, which you'll see. And it needs to be saved at a 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. And that is simply how fast the samples are taken. And you don't really need to know all that technical stuff. And there are different settings, like 48, for example, that you could use, but they want you to use 44.1. And if you get these settings right for Audible, and these are the Audible ACX specs that I'm presenting here, they will likely be fine for the other distributors as well, such as Findaway Voices. And you do need to be careful with those settings. I get into a bit of trouble. I wasn't careful enough. This is from Audacity. Looking at that, I thought this meant that it was saved at a higher than 192 kilobytes per second rate, but it was not. So that's why you need to select constant. And when you select constant, then you'll have the option of selecting specifically 192 kilobytes per second, as opposed to what you see here, 220 kilobytes per second to 260, which is not correct. So don't assume anything, double check your settings. How do you double check your settings? Well, after you've exported your file, you've done your recording and you've exported your audio file, you can actually check that file to see if it matches the specifications that are required. If you're on a PC, you can do so by simply right-clicking on the file. Then you will see this dialog box come up, go to Details, and then you can see down there, I've circled 192 kilobytes per second. So I know that that is the right bit rate. It, depending on your operating system, if you're on a Mac, it can be a little bit more tricky. The way I check it on a Mac is I simply go to iTunes, and then I can right-click and it will give me those parameters so I can see, and then you can check other settings as well if you want to. So where to distribute your audiobook? You've finished your audiobook recording. You got it all done. It's going to meet the specifications. My book, as I mentioned, it was originally published by Five Rivers Publishing. They went with Amazon and went with an exclusive deal with Amazon. If you go exclusive with Amazon Audible ACX, you get a 40% royalty rate. Whereas if you go non-exclusive with them, you only get a 25% royalty rate. So I was originally exclusive because that was the deal that my publisher made with them. Eventually, my publisher gave me back the rights to my book, at which point I went to ACX and I said, I want to go non-exclusive because I wasn't selling enough through them. And sure, the royalty rate, if you're exclusive with them, is higher at 40%, but 40% of nothing is nothing. And I wasn't selling nothing, but I wasn't selling enough. I wanted to go to places like Findaway Voices and the other distributors listed here, like Kobo Writing Life. So right now, I am non-exclusive with Amazon, and I have my book up with Findaway Voices, and I intend to try these others later when I get around to it, when I'm not making slideshows like this. So that's it in a nutshell. If you have any questions, this is how you contact me. I'm up on LinkedIn, feel free to connect, or at Twitter, at Islanders. Islanders spelled strangely. I'm from Prince Edward Island, that's why it says Islanders. Or you can email me directly at islanders@gmail.com. My website is assortednonsense.com, and you can pretty much find everything out about me and my work there. So thank you for listening.